This other side said, actually, the European civilization come from, the Western civilization come from European Renaissance. But you and I know that the European Renaissance only happens in the 15th and 16th century. But I'm talking about a civilization that happens 8,000 BC. Doesn't quite correlate. Then Zelda produces a very, very long book in 1741 where he says Europe is superior for this reason, because its inhabitants have excellent customs, they are a courteous people, and they are erudite in both sciences and arts. Well, that all is meant to show that as the debate went on, it moved from debate about facts and the science to debates based on stereotypes and perceptions of themselves and of others. Which takes us to the idea of stereotyping and centrism. Do you understand this? Of course, you come from lunch, so you probably understand that. Just a little bit on Afrocentrism. Afrocentrism, that one element of it. One is to appropriate the universal culture that has become known as Western civilization. Because people could trace a lot of things that are not Western in their origin, but have become Western in their ownership. One of the best treatments for flu, if you look at a number of these flu mixtures, it's got a particle there that spells like copacupana, which is actually extracted from Ghana, but it is owned by Europe. Extracted, but you know this thing called intellectual property right, which means you may have been the one who found it first, but I'm the one who registered first. Bafana Bafana, isn't it? You may be the one who made it first, but I'm the one who registered it. So in the books, who is the owner? Yeah, I don't have to have been the owner. I must be the one who announced it first. So if you are less arrogant than me and I'm more arrogant, I say this is mine, and you are humble, you don't say it's yours, who does it become later on? I rewrite history. So, and then the second strand of Afrocentrism is the one which says that there are even more civilizations that Africa came up with long before there was a trace of civilization in the West. And Sheikh Anta Diop is part of that, but it starts from where Bernal actually begins. I like this quote, and I'm going to read it for you. In all history, nothing is so surprising and so difficult, or so difficult to account for, as the sudden rise of civilization in Greece. Much of what makes the civilization had existed for thousands of years in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, and had spread thence to neighboring countries. That includes Greece. What they achieved in art and literature is familiar to everybody. But what they did in the purely intellectual realm is even more exceptional. They invented mathematics and science and philosophy. They wrote history as opposed to annals. If you know anything, end quote, if you know anything about origin of history and stuff like that, Europeans up until about the 15th century wrote annals. In other words, a record of things as they happened in a not so systematic or interpretative way. But they say as early as the 7,000 BC, the Egyptians were already writing an interpretative history. So the art of writing, which became the art behind writing novels, art behind writing books, art behind writing poems, actually had been conceptualized by the Egyptians. But others saw it and liked it, and they went off and used it. But what they did not do is to acknowledge it. What do you call the practice of taking somebody's stuff and not acknowledge it? Not me who said it. Who said it's plagiarism. It's not me who said it. So it's plagiarism. Pythagoras, mathematics, Aristotle, politics, Plato, philosophy, Herodotus, medical science, all affirmed in their own writing that they got their ideas from Egypt. And they are the fathers of Western civilization. So if the father got his idea from Egypt, so where does the civilization belong? They did that. But look at this, and this is what Diop made. That in spite of all these are the most prominent Greek scholars. Everybody knows them. They said it themselves because they had a different culture. They're more receptive to others. That's why they were able to adopt an Egyptian civilization and without claiming it as theirs. Actually, it is the Central Europeans who call it Greek civilization. They never called it Greek civilization themselves. It's very interesting. Huh? And just take from the fact that they themselves also went to study in Egypt. And we know of no one, not of Greece, who went to Egypt to study. Because they didn't believe anything good would come out of that. They are the ones who coined the term Africa, which meant a black, a dark, and a dark, empty space. So the Greeks were different Europeans. But because they were not part of Europe, they were Mediterranean people. They were from the sea. They are connected with Greece, with Egypt. So they don't call it their own. They actually proclaim that they actually learned from the great schools and the pyramids of Egypt. But look at what Europeans do. Europeans reject that, and they say the Greek civilization came from Greece. In other words, they're saying Aristotle, Pythagoras, Plato, and Herodotus, actually you invented these ideas. Perhaps you forgot. Perhaps you are too moral, too nice, too Christian, or too religious. So they're saying you've simply just forgotten that you actually invented it because we had it first from you. And Herodotus says, no, but we got it somewhere. He said, no, it can't come from there. It should have come from you. And that is how it happened. And that debate continues for a long period of time. If you look at the early writings of the Europeans that had contact with these guys, all they tried to do, and there is also kind of a Germanic, Austrian tradition of writing that was trying to help the Greek to accept that they are the inventors. Because they believe the Greek, because of their southern location, had lost pride in themselves. So patriotism begins as a concept and is used to help the Greek accept that the inventions of the Egyptians are actually the Greeks' invention. And these are the things that get unearthed. So the Pythagorean maths, the theory of 4 elements of the theives, which is behind the physical sciences, the Epicurean materialism concept, the Platonic idealism, Judaism, Islam, the antecedents of Christianity. There is in Egypt a god called Orisis, who is the Redeemer god who died for others. The trace of it around 750 BC. Cosmology, science, all can be traced back to Egypt. Let me just make this point before we discuss it a little better, because I see there's a hand. And also other traces that are made. Scholars looked at how society was organized. It is amazing to find that as early as 8000 BC, Egyptian society was already organized along the lines we've come to call Western. A particular order of political authority, particular social cohesion, a particular stratification of society, a particular sources of authority. Egyptians had it long before we know the earliest traces of it in Europe, which is the Germanic culture. Very, very interesting. For example, the kingship, the idea of kings, a kingly authority, are already traced in Egyptian culture way back in 8,000 BC. 8,000 BC. But kingship becomes a norm in Europe. You know when? In the early modern age. That is around the 12th, between the 8th and the 9th and the 14th century after Christ. That is more than 14,000 years later. Idea of kingship and statehood, creating states and stuff like this. Actually, you and I know that the origin of a Western state is in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia, at the end of the clash of empires that had grown bigger and bigger. Remember, Europe had a feudal lords, and the feudal lords were that chap who gets to owns the same amount of land as you, and by virtue of the fact that she has more kids, and she has more friends, she tills her land very well, and she's able to survive the vagaries of nature. But you do not have quite the same, so you don't survive the vagaries of labor. How do you survive? You sell off a part of your land to her in return for her grace. And with time, she will allow you to live on the land that used to be yours in return for providing you certain amenities. She then has become your lord. You have become herself, called serf, or what we call tenants today, labor tenants. You're sitting in there, you work, and in return for that, you have a land to have your house in. But she has taken control over you because she owns your land. It's called landlord. So the lords, you have it up to this day in Britain, had power over this. So because they now have yours and hers, and he only has his own, he falls into hard times. Where does it run? It runs to this. She increases her authority, her economic power, through yours, and then through yours. With time, this thing becomes, this family of hers start to acquire power over many more families, and therefore a land. And you call that an empire. So they become emperor by virtue of the fact that they survived the law of the jungle. So she becomes an emperor because it's an insatiable desire to acquire power. She owns half of this place. Another one who became like that side also owns half of that place. But you're not satisfied because there's still some more possible land. So you want to acquire that other's land. Now you cannot acquire through concessions or compromise or appropriation as you did with her and them. Now the only way to acquire it is to engage in a military confrontation with them and defeat them so that you can acquire them. You get to do it with that empire, you get to do it with that empire, you consolidate it. We call you a Roman empire. She consolidates it, we call it a Byzantine empire. He consolidates it, we call it an Aryan empire. He consolidates it, we call it a Qing empire in China. After some time, whatever had been complex has been reduced into big-sized conglomerates of political authority. And because their very logic is conquest, they're going to have to conquer each other. What that happens is what we call internecine war. And that internecine war destroyed all of these empires. They destroyed each other. The strongest was the Roman Empire, also got destroyed in the process. And at that point, at the end of that war, a very long war, then they sit down and they say, we got to avoid these wars. How do we avoid these wars? Let us do this now. They have a logical and a scientific way of constituting political authority. From this day onward, it's got to be a people who feel that they have an affinity to each other. In today's way, we call it nation. And it's got to be a land that is defined and accepted by others, which we call a territory. And that, which today we call a nation state, is going to be the minute form of political authority we're going to organize power around. It's not going to be about the survival of the fittest, those who are able to gobble others up, but we're going to have it fixed. Because it's got to be a territory and a people who have an affinity to each other, and they will be the authority. You know what authority is? Power. But then these people can't run themselves. So how do you do it? Then they say, the Greeks now to come to that, and again they had seen it in Egypt, how Herod ran his kingdom. They had what you called meetings or councils that decide issues of the nation. So then they say, now this nation, we have two things, isn't it? You have a nation and you have a territory. Which of the two can decide? The nation or a people? Which has the reasoning power to make a decision? Is it the land or is it the people? The people. So then they say the people must then decide to cede the power, or what we call cede sovereignty, to a small group of people, a council of people, to decide on their behalf the matters of their land they just designed. But the people do not just have a power to put them in, must also have a power to put them out. You call one vote, you call the other veto. So they decided they must have the power to vote them or veto them out. Vote them in, veto them out. And in Greek language, the term is vote, yep, and the second one is called ostracization. To ostracize was part of the political system. Today, ostracize sounds like negative, isolate and stuff. But ostracize was to pull power away from. You know why? Because the idea is sovereignty belongs to the people. They only cede it. They lend the small group of people, which you today going to call government. And then they say, these people who are called government are going to have a platform where they go back to check whether the people who gave them power still affirm it. So there's going to be an auditorium where they talk and talk and talk and talk. What is to talk in French? Parler. So parliament is what? What happens in parliament? Yeah. So why you have a problem with people in parliament just talk and talk and talk? What's called parliament. The original idea was that to have a platform where people talk, because to vent out is good. So you create all of these institutions. It all comes from ideas originated from Egypt, refined by the Greeks, and publicized and claimed by the West. Of course, they refined it as well. So the idea is you have traces of this statehood long before what we're discussing. Because what we are describing is what happened in 1648, when all these Western empires come together and they decide to create a nation state. But what they're actually doing is what the Nile state of Egypt in 515 100 BC was already doing. The Kush state, the Exum state, the Tekru state in Senegal. These were the kingdoms and dynasties of Ghana, of the Congo, of Great Zimbabwe. There was a thing called Great Zimbabwe before the current Zimbabwe. Benin, of Yoruba, of Oyo were doing.